Among Muslims, the birth rate is invariably higher than that of non-Muslims. This is what enables Muslim populations in Europe to grow so rapidly. Indeed, it is now estimated that by 2043, Islam will be the second largest religion in Ireland. This penchant for breeding is rooted in imperialism, for in the Hadith, Muhammad stresses that in order for Muslims to outnumber their enemies, they should marry women who are prolific. This desire for conquest is openly expressed by Sheikh Muhammad Ayed, Imam of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. In a blistering speech from September 2015, Ayed implores Muslim refugees to breed with Europeans in order to take over the continent.
كذلك أوروبا كل أقطارها كلهم تقطر قلوبهم حقدا على المسلمين يتمنون لنا الموت ولكنهم فقدوا إخصابهم ويبحثون عن إخصاب عندنا سنخصبهم وسوف ننزل وسوف ننجب منهم لأننا سوف نفتح بلادهم رغم أنوفكم يا أيها الألمان يا أيها الأمريكان يا أيها الفرنسيون يا أيها الطليان يا كل من على وزن الطليان خذوا اللاجئين سنطلبهم منكم قريبا باسم دولة الخلافة القادمة وسنقول لكم هؤلاء أبناؤنا أرسلوهم أو نرسل لكم جيوش.
Of course, the jihadist imperative also extends to electoral politics. In the Netherlands, we now have Islamist political parties whose stated goal is to implement Sharia. In Belgium, the Islam Party has called for men and women to be separated on public transport and for the wearing of headscarves to be made mandatory. These organizations are part of a renewed push for Europe to be ruled under Sharia. The strategy for this was devised by the Islamic Council of Europe in 1980. In his book, Muslim Minorities in the World Today, Ali Khatani states that Muslims should strive to obtain political recognition and use this power to change the nation as a whole. Quote, "Once the community is well organized, its leaders should strive to seek the recognition by the authorities of Muslims as a religious community which has the right to maintain its characteristics. Once recognized, the community should continue to request the same rights as the other religious communities enjoy in the country. Eventually, the community may seek to gain political rights as a constituent community of the nation. Once these rights are obtained, the community should seek to disseminate its characteristics throughout that land." Unquote. In the UK, Islamists have entrenched themselves in senior positions. The current mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has described jihadist terror as, quote, "part and parcel of life in a big city." We also have Naz Shah, the shadow minister for community cohesion, who has been caught trying to downplay the atrocities of Muslim rape gangs. Then there is Saida Warsi, a baroness who has played a major role in normalizing the myth of Islamophobia. Finally, we mustn't overlook Shahid Malik, the former International Development Minister and the very first Muslim MP. Addressing an audience of 50,000 Muslims in October 2008, Malik outlined his vision of an all-Muslim parliament.
In 1997 we got our first Muslim MP. In 2001 we had 2 Muslim MPs. In 2005 we had 4 Muslim MPs. Inshallah in 2009-10 we'll have 8 Muslim MPs. In 2014 we'll have 16 Muslim MPs. At this rate, the whole Parliament will be Muslim. But you know we've got 4 Muslim MPs, there should be 20 Muslim MPs in Parliament, and inshallah very shortly we'll see that. And I'm confident, as Britain's first Muslim Minister, that inshallah in the next 30 years or so we'll see a Prime Minister in this country who happens to share my faith.
This is how Islam seeks to destroy the West from within. By increasing their numbers and getting into positions of authority, Muslims can successfully erode the cultural defences of Europeans, namely by presenting racism, colonialism and xenophobia as Europe's original sins. Thus, while MPs and councillors are distracted with proving that they aren't Islamophobic, jihadists can proceed to implement Sharia one small step at a time. Eventually, they will be in a position to abolish democracy altogether. This is the strategy which Saudi-trained imams promote behind closed doors. Take a look at this clip of Dr. Ijaz Mian, filmed over 10 years ago at Sparkbrook Mosque in Birmingham.
Dr. Mian is yet another UK preacher who has taught in Saudi Arabia. He spent 6 years studying Islam in Ibn Saud University in Riyadh. He wants to see religious police operating on the streets.
They would make sure that every person prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 5 times. Every woman will be covered. From the top to the toes. Hijab. Otherwise the police will just correct them.
He has a radical plan for this country. Muslims shouldn't accept British democracy.
Everywhere, king, queen, House of Commons, if you accept it, then you're a part of it. You don't accept it, but you have to dismantle it. So you being a Muslim, you have to fix it up. There will know what you call House of Commons. From that White House to this Black House, we know that we have to dismantle it.
Muslims must grow in strength, then take over.
You are in a what you call situation in which you have to live like a state within a state till you take over. But until this happens, you have to pray. Or you become in such a force that the people, they just submit to you. Hands up. Till you become strong enough that to take over.
It is in this context that we begin our journey into Islamic supremacism. In Part 1, we will examine jihadist terror and the subjugation of non-Muslims under Islamic rule. To set the scene, permit me to quote the historian Ephraim Karsh at length. In his excellent study, titled Islamic Imperialism, A History, Karsh explains the historical context of Islam's emergence and how Muhammad ultimately succeeded by tapping into the warlike ethos of the nomadic Arabs. Karsh also makes the crucial distinction between Islam, which is imperial in nature, and Christianity, which only became imperial when it was adopted as the official religion of Byzantium, hence the enduring problem of Muslim belligerence. Quote, "Contrary to the conventional wisdom, it is the Middle East where the institution of empire not only originated, for example, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Iran, and so on, but where its spirit has also outlived its European counterpart. At the time of the rise of Islam in the early 7th century, the Middle East was divided between the two great rival empires of Byzantium, successor to the Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, and Iran, ruled since the 3rd century by the Sassanid dynasty, with its capital in Ctesiphon, where Baghdad stands today. Though the Arabian Peninsula, birthplace of Islam, was on the fringes of this bipolar system, it was deeply implicated in its activities. The Iranians had colonies throughout eastern and southern Arabia, in Najd and in Yemen, and their influence extended all the way to the Hijaz, the northwestern part of the peninsula. Byzantium's power was felt throughout western Arabia, from the Syrian desert, where it had client kingdoms, to Yemen, where its Ethiopian allies had ruled until they were expelled by the Iranians. In the decades preceding Muhammad's advent, as pastoral practices progressively superseded agricultural and commercial interests, and with trade routes increasingly harassed by marauders, violence had become endemic to Arabian society. This was vividly illustrated by the numerous fratricidal clashes known as Ayyam al-Arab, the days of the Arabians, arising from disputes over such material issues as cattle, pasture lands, or springs, and glorified by contemporary poetry as an ideal of heroism and manhood. We slew in requital for our slain an equal number of them, and carried away an unaccountable number of fettered prisoners. The days have thus raised us to be foremost with our battles in warfare after warfare. Men find in us nothing to point their finger of scorn. No single activity of pre-Islamic society epitomized this warlike ethos more succinctly than the raid, razzia, as it is commonly known, a marauding expedition aimed at seizing camels, horses, livestock, or, less frequently, women from a hostile tribe. For most Bedouins, the razzia was not merely a means of subsistence, but rather an exciting social endeavour that helped reaffirm tribal solidarity and win invaluable military experience. So much so that some scholars have described it as the national sport of the nomadic Arabians. Indeed, Muhammad initially devised the concept of jihad, exertion in the path of Allah, as he called his God, as a means to entice his local followers to raid Meccan caravans, instantaneously transforming a common tribal practice into a supreme religious duty and the primary vehicle for the spread of Islam throughout the ages. He developed and amplified this concept with the expansion of his political ambitions until it became a rallying call for world domination, and he established the community of believers, or the Ummah, as the political framework for the practice of this religion in all territories that it conquered. In doing so, Muhammad at once tapped into the Middle East's millenarian legacy and ensured its perpetuation for many centuries to come. It is true that this pattern of historical development is not uniquely Middle Eastern or Islamic. Other parts of the world, Europe in particular, have had their share of imperial powers and imperialist expansion, while Christianity's universal vision is no less sweeping than that of Islam. The worlds of Christianity and Islam, however, have developed differently in one fundamental respect. The Christian faith won over an existing empire in an extremely slow and painful process, and its universalism was originally conceived in purely spiritual terms that made a clear distinction between God and Caesar. By the time it was embraced by the Byzantine emperors as a tool for buttressing their imperial claims, 3 centuries after its foundation, Christianity had in place a countervailing ecclesiastical institution with an abiding authority over the wills and actions of all believers. The birth of Islam, by contrast, was inextricably linked with the creation of a world empire, and its universalism was inherently imperialist. It did not distinguish between temporal and religious powers, which were combined in the person of Muhammad, who derived his authority directly from Allah and acted at one and the same time as the head of the state and head of the church. This allowed the Prophet to cloak his political ambitions with a religious aura and to channel Islam's energies into its instrument of aggressive expansion, there being no internal organism of equal force to counterbalance it. Whereas Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, Muhammad used God's name to build an earthly kingdom. He spent the last 10 years of his life fighting to unify Arabia under his reign. Had it not been for his sudden death on June 8, 632 AD, he would have most probably expanded his rule well beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Even so, within a decade of Muhammad's death, a vast empire stretching from Iran to Egypt and from Yemen to northern Syria had come into being under the banner of Islam in one of the most remarkable examples of empire building in world history. Long after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the abolition of the Caliphate in the wake of World War I, the link between religion, politics, and society remains very much alive in the Muslim and Arab worlds. If Christendom was slower than Islam in marrying religious universalism with political imperialism, it was faster in shedding both notions. By the 18th century, the West had lost its religious messianism. Apart from in the Third Reich, it had lost its imperial ambitions by the mid-20th century. Islam has retained its imperialist ambitions to this day." Unquote.
كل الأديان والعقائد عبر التاريخ البشري تعرضت للنقد والتجريح، وهذا ما ساعد على إصلاحها وتطويرها مع الزمن. العقيدة التي تقطع رقاب منتقديها مصيرها أن تتحول إلى إرهاب وطغيان، وهذا هو حال الإسلام منذ أن بدأ وحتى تاريخ اليوم. حكم على أتباعه بالسجن، ومن تجاوز عتبة ذلك السجن لقي حتفه. الصحيفة الدنماركية مارست حقها في حرية التعبير، والحريات أقدس مقدسات الغرب ولا شيء يعلو عليها. ولكن أقول ولكن لو لم يكن الإسلام على ما هو عليه لما ظهرت تلك الرسوم، فهي لم تأتي من فراغ، ولم ينبشها الرسام من وحي خياله، بل كانت انعكاسا لمعرفته. فالرجل الغربي الذي يقرأ قول محمد جعل الله لي رزقي تحت حد سيفي لا يمكن أن يتخيل عمامة محمد على شكل حمامة سلام وليس على شكل قنبلة. على المسلمين أن يتعلموا كيف يصغون إلى انتقادات الآخرين، علهم يعيدون النظر في التعاليم الإرهابية التي بين أيديهم، ومتى استطاعوا أن يفعلوا ذلك سيراهم العالم بطريقة أفضل، ثم سيرسمهم بطريقة أفضل. ردود فعل المسلمين التي اتسمت بالوحشية والهمجية والتخلف زادت من قيمة تلك الرسوم وأعطتها أهمية أكثر مما تستحق، ببساطة لأنها أثبتت صحة تلك الرسوم وأثبتت صحة الرسالة التي أرادت تلك الرسوم أن ترسلها. المسلم مخلوق ارتكاسي غير عاقل، سلبته تعاليمه عقله وحرضت عواطفه، ولذلك سقطت به إلى مستوى مخلوق دوني لا يستطيع أن يضبط نفسه ولا يستطيع أن يرد على الأحداث بطريقة عقلانية.
ألم تشاهد الأطفال، عشرات الأطفال الذين أبيدوا في غزة في محرقة بشهادة إسرائيل؟
لماذا هم مستاءون مما يجري في غزة؟
تفضل.
وقد قال لهم القرآن أن تقتلوا أو تقتلوا، وهم يقتلون ويقتلون، فأين الغضاضة في الأمر؟
سب للقرآن لا يمكن.
يا سيدتي،
عايز أتكلم في سياسة، تتفضل.
يا سيدتي، رجاء في السياسة، رجاء، هو كل الكلام بتاعه عن السياسة، ردي عليه في السياسة.
لا تستطيع
فضل.
دكتور فيصل، أنت تعرف أنك لا تستطيع أن تفصل بين الإسلام والسياسة، فالإسلام ليس دينا وإنما سياسة، ويجب أن تدعني أن أعبر عن آرائي بالطريقة التي أريد أن أعبر فيها. عندما اتصلت بي لم تقل أنك لا تستطيعين أن تتناولي الإسلام والقرآن. الإسلام قال لهم أن تقتلوا أو تقتلوا، وها هم يقتلون ويقتلون، فأين الغضاضة؟ هم يريدون الشهادة ويريدون أن يلتقوا بحورياتهم العذراء، وكل ما هنالك إسرائيل تسارع لهم في طلبهم. فأين الخلل في ذلك الأمر؟ إذا أردتم أن تغيروا مجرى الأحداث عليكم أن تعيدوا النظر في التعاليم الإرهابية التي بين أيديكم، عليكم أن تعترفوا بحق الآخر في الحياة وأن تحترموا هذا الحق، عليكم أن تعلموا أطفالكم الحب والسلام والعيش المشترك والعمل المثمر، وعندما تفعلون ذلك سيحترمكم العالم، سيراكم بطريقة أفضل وسيرسموكم بطريقة أفضل. حماس اختارت هذا الطريق وعليكم أن تدفعوا عواقب خياركم. عندما تريدون سلاما ألا على ثقة بأن إسرائيل تريد السلام، ولكن طالما تتلون على أنفسكم تلك التعاليم المليئة بالحقد والضغينة والإرهاب لن تستطيعون أن تصنعوا سلاما مع الآخر. يجب أن تعترفوا بحق إسرائيل في الحياة وتحترموا هذا الحق، وأن تعلموا أولادكم الحب والسلام والعيش المشترك، وعندئذ سيكون هناك سلام. هل دعوتني إلى البرنامج كي أسمع تلك الخطابات الرنانة التي مضى على اشترالها 1400 سنة؟
جميل،
الحمد لله ان احنا عندنا هوية وحضارة.
تصور رجلا يؤمن بقتل تارك الصلاة ينتقد الحريات في الغرب. إنها لمهزلة. أي ماض ذلك الذي يدافع عنه؟ هل يدافع عن الغزو والغنائم؟
ماضي الأمة الإسلامية التي كانت منارة العلم على مستوى العالم،
ومنتاح ما طاب له من النساء وقطع الرقاب وتقطيع الأيدي والأرجل من خلاف وتكفير الناس وشرب بول الإبل